Hi, I'm Nick, creator of Colostle, and first up, thank you. Um, it's been amazing. Campaign's going incredibly. I was not expecting such an incredible response, and thank you so much to every single one of you who's pledged. It has blown me away. A few people in the comments have asked a couple of questions about how the gameplay works, suggesting whether to share pages from the book in the gameplay section or simply just to potentially create a video. So I thought, hey, I'll make a video. That sounds like a good plan. I'll guide you through a typical encounter phase and a typical combat phase. Obviously, you'll only see a slight sort of inkling of what you could discover on your adventures, but hopefully it'll give you a little bit of an idea for how Colossal will work and what the experience of playing the game is like. So, as I've mentioned before on the campaign and also on the video as well, the first stage is your character. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole process of thinking up my character. I'm going to start from the point of I've already decided who I am and which class I'm going to play as. And really there's only two major stats that you have to consider for your class, and that is your exploration score and your combat score. And most of the rest of what builds your character is kind of up to you. There's in the book there's some prompts and some ideas about what it means to be these various classes, and sort of stories about prompts about what could make your character who they are. But these two scores are the only things that matter for gameplay. The exploration score affects your exploration phase, and your combat score affects the combat phase, unsurprisingly. And what these scores mean is how many cards you draw in those various phases. So today I'm going to be playing as an armed character, which is the one you've seen in the image in the campaign breakdown. These hunters, these warriors, have an incredible piece of a rook sort of bonded with them through a ritual that connects either to their back or to any other part of their body. And the arm can be various different things. It can be a hand, or it could be a bladed weapon, or really anything you can think of. Anything that the rooks are also different from one to the next. That if you create this bizarre rook and you decide that your character takes its arm, then that's the arm it will have. In my case, I think my character has a bladed arm, kind of like a dull blade, like almost like a crowbar in a way. Just a tool that can get in and sort of work and do damage potentially. But as an armed character, this means I have an exploration score of 3 and a combat score of 4. This is because the armed are typically warriors. They run on instinct. They operate more on reaction, and they're not as strong explorers as some of the other classes. So, as I said before, the gameplay works in two phases. There's the exploration phase and the combat phase, and these both involve drawing cards. But the combat phase doesn't engage until you draw a card in your exploration phase that may trigger combat. In a few exceptions, combat is always optional. So if you come across a potential opponent in your exploration phase, your character could choose to not enter into combat at that time. Although there are a couple of exceptions to that where the prompt table will tell you this is going down, something's happening. So if you draw a rook card, for example, which is always a jack, queen, or a king, then there is a rook in that encounter phase, and it's up to your character whether or not they decide to engage. The exploration phase consists of drawing the number of cards that is the same as your exploration score, checking those cards against the tables, and seeing what is in front of your character for what we could imagine as a day in their exploration. It's kind of up to you how you perceive the time. If it works better for your story, maybe it's taking place over a week and your journal entries are only entered once a week. But I kind of like to think of the idea of an exploration phase as a day. So, because my exploration score is 3, I'm going to draw 3 cards and I'm going to put them out in front of me. So, let's have a look at this. We have a 6 of clubs, a 5 of spades, and a king of diamonds. Right. So, already, straight off the bat, I can see there's a rook in today's encounter. And not only that, the biggest of them all, the colossal, the massive rook. But let's have a look at the table and see what the other 2 cards mean. So black cards all follow the prompts from the black cards table. And black cards typically involve scenic things, so structures and objects, non-alive things that you might encounter on your adventure. I haven't drawn any red cards this time. Red cards in the red encounter table suggest organic, or people or creatures that you might encounter. So, 6 of clubs. Sorry, I should say, what counts first is the number. And on the number on the table, you can then read across to see what your prompt is. But the suit is a modifier, and it can go one of two ways with the suit. So let's focus on the 6 first. The 6 is a trap. It says here, a trap, maybe a hunter's trap or a pit or some old machinery. What do you do now? And if it's spades, you avoid it, and if it's clubs, you are caught in it. And sadly, it's clubs. So I'm caught in a trap in this encounter. That's going down. Number 5, a great strange mechanism that seems to operate something within the Colossal. Pipes, gear wheels, and levers. It seems oversized, but you think you can operate it. If it's damaged, you may need something to repair it. So if it's spades, it's functional, and if it's clubs, it's damaged. Now I've got spades, obviously, which means this piece of machinery that I found out in the wild is functional. If it was damaged, there are potential ways that you can add to encounters that you discover in your adventures, which in the further rules of the rulebook you'll see there are events tables and items tables, and you can look at those and consult those and add elements to and flavours to what happened in order to potentially find out what you need to fix that mechanism. But in this case, it's functional, it's good to go. And of course there's a rook as well. So at this point I'm faced with the decision of, as an adventurer, how do I react to these various prompts, these various occurrences that have happened in the encounter phase? Well, straight off the bat, I've got trap and I've got machinery, and to me, it makes the most sense if I combine those two together, and my character is trapped in the machinery. So it could go something like, my character approaches this machine, and maybe in previous days, I found doors or ruins that all seem like they would function as well, but they're waiting for something. They're waiting for something that needs to be activated. Perhaps this machine is the answer to that. I don't know if it is, and maybe it's going to take a few more encounter phases and a few more card drawings to find out what the consequences of my actions are. But my character's quite bullheaded and a little foolhardy, and I think they think I'm just going to go in. So I go in and I try and operate the machine, but I can't move it. It's huge. It's ancient, but I can tell it works, but I'm not strong enough. It's built for someone bigger than me. So I'll use my arm, because that's what it's for. It's stronger than me and it's bigger. It's from a rook, of course. So I get my arm in on that lever, resting against it, and I push against a bit of the casing of the machine, and the lever shifts. But I've put so much effort and work into that the arm is now trapped in the machine. So now I've combined the trap and the machine together to create a moment in my character's adventure. And of course, now that I'm trapped in an ancient machine, that's when the rook comes. So at this stage, you could write in your journal all of that's just happened, and maybe right up to the point that the encounter begins with the rook. Another option is, and something that I would definitely suggest, is as well as your journal, you have a piece of rough paper here as well. And you can just quickly note down trap, machine, and large rook, so that you know what you're working with when you come to write your journal entry. Whichever way works best for you. I like the idea of writing up until the point of the combat, because now we're going to resolve the combat and see how this goes down for my character. So, moving on to combat, we can move these cards away for now, and they go into a discard pile, which eventually, once you've used up your whole deck, you can shuffle and continue your adventure with. But for now, we need to get into the combat itself. And the way that works is we're going to be drawing cards to build your opponent, which in this case is a large rook. So, this involves, again, consulting the rulebook and going through the various stages of building your rook, creating your opponent. So the first stage of this is to draw a card to establish the rook's body type. This can vary from martial, armoured, flying, and speed. And this is dependent on which suit you draw. So I'll draw this first card here. And I've got diamonds. And diamonds is speed. So this is a speed type of rook, and I'm going to make a note of that here. Speed rooks are typically, they're unusually fast considering their size, and they're also strangely lithe and thinner. They're not the bulky, heavy, clompy sort of rooks. These are unnerving in their sort of thin and rapid movements. Potentially one of the scariest to encounter if you're encountering a large one, which I am. So, I know it's a speed type. Next up is its magic type. If I turn the page here, we can see a table to see the magic type. And for diamonds, that's ice. Now, magic is kind of really just for flavour in the game. Magic works as a way to add to your descriptions when you're writing about your combat, how those moves manifested. There's no real strength or weakness to magic attacks. Whether or not your rook attacks with magic will be dictated in the combat phase, but it's just a way for you to describe what's happening in a more exciting way. You'll see later on how actual combat works as to who wins or loses in rounds. So we know it's a speed type, and we know its magic is ice. So next up is its weapon. Every rook carries a weapon of some kind as well as its magic type. And I've drawn a black card, which means it has a ranged weapon. So if it attacks with its weapon in the combat phase, then it will attack with some sort of ranged weapon. Again, this is up to you. This could be a stone crossbow mounted on the top of its head that launches impossible stone bolts, or it could be cannon that are mounted on its shoulders, kind of like the battlements of an actual castle, and they launch explosive cannonballs into the fray. Finally, the last thing to draw is your reward. If you can take this rook down, this is what you're going to win. Now, these options cover the various different kinds of classes. I've started out as an armed character, but I could win another arm, or I could win a helm, which is another class, the helmed, or I could win a companion. All rooks have a smaller kind of core rook that lives within the very center of them, and if you are able to win one of those from a rook encounter, then that companion joins you as a sort of following adventurer. So let's see what reward I'll get. Clubs. That's another arm. Interesting. I'm already in my head starting to think about story potential here and what could actually happen in the battle. So I'll just note those few things down. Speed, ice, ranged, and reward is an arm. So now it gets to the combat itself. This is where it gets exciting. Now that we know what my rook is, and I have the notes of what it is, I can take those cards and I can put them aside. Because now it's going to be all about working out how the combat goes down. And the way that works is you have to look at your character's combat score. As I mentioned earlier, I have an exploration score and a combat score. And if we have a look at my character, I have a combat score of 4. This is the number of moves I'm going to have in battle. And what you do in battle is you draw all of your available moves to you first. So, the 4 cards I will have available to me to fight with are a 5, an 8, an ace, and a 9. And what's important here, mostly, is the number. The number is what's going to govern whether or not I can beat an incoming attack. But the suit is important as well, as I will make clear later on. So, there's not a great draw. I've got a couple of high cards. Aces are low, so that's pretty bad. And it all depends on what comes at me now. Now, because it's a massive rook, because I drew a king to create this rook, he's got an attack score of 3. So he's going to do 3 rounds of attack on me. And so you draw a card for each attack, and you assign one of your attack cards as a counter to that. So the rook's first attack comes at me, and it's the 10 of hearts. Now, attack types are governed by the suit, which again, we have a table in the rulebook for. And a heart attack is a magic attack. And since we've established that this rook is an ice type, that means this incoming attack will be a magical attack. 1 second while I have a sip of tea. Delicious. So, I am now faced with the option of countering this incoming ice attack. And I have to choose one of my 4 moves that I have to go against it. But not a single one of them is going to stop a 10, because the 10's a higher number than what I have. So at this point, it's up to you to decide what you think might be the right thing to do, not knowing what's coming next. A good basic strategy is to use one of your lower cards, because it doesn't matter. You can't beat the 10, so you may as well get one of your lower ones out of the way, because you're not going to need that later probably either. So, at this point it's worth probably either making a note, or again, going into your journal at this first strike and deciding what's happening in the story. Because the rook is approaching me and I'm trapped in this machine, it spies me from afar. The noise I've made with the machine firing up and the gear wheels and the clanking of the levers and everything catches its attention, and I don't have a choice. I'm trapped with this machine. And since it's a ranged fighter as well, it starts running towards me, but it's still distant. And since this is a magic attack, it throws a bolt of ice at me, knowing that I'm pinned in this machine and I'm an easy target. And the ice flies and it hits me and it collides with my shoulder, and ice crystals grow over me and over my back and over where my arm is attached, my rook arm is attached to my body. Huge ice crystals, it freezes, and this is a wound. Because I haven't been able to counter this attack, that's one wound marked against my character. So I'll make a note of that I've taken one wound in this battle. So at this point you could write down how that attack goes down and what happens to your character. And I think that's maybe the more exciting way to do it, because otherwise you can potentially change the events later on when you come to write it all up afterwards. This is in real time. This is what's happening to your character now. So, character's in a bit of trouble. I've taken a wound, I've got ice crystals growing down half of my body, and I'm trapped in an old machine while a rook sprints towards me from a distance. Let's see what its next attack is. Ha ha ha! A measly 2, a 2 of clubs. Now this is good. Not only do I have, I should have mentioned, sorry, which one I've used against this. So I used the ace on this and counteracted that attack by not countering it and getting a wound. Next attack comes in, and not only is it a low number, which I'm very well equipped to come back against, but I also have a clubs card. So this is an opportunity for me to land a critical attack, a critical response to the incoming attack. So a club is a unarmed attack. This is what the rook is going to try and do without using its magic, without using its weapons, without doing anything else. It's just going to try and bludgeon me with one of its limbs. But I'm going to counter it also with an unarmed attack, which is the same type, and this would be critical because I beat it and I match the suit. So now it's again up to me to narratively decide how this goes down. So, since they're both unarmed attacks, and I'm trapped in this machine, I'm not going to be able to use a strike. I'm not even going to be able to use any sort of my arm or any magic or anything like that, or any weapon I might be carrying, because I didn't use one of my weapon cards. I used an unarmed attacker card. So narratively, what might be quite exciting is, in order to escape, I use the fact that the ice has frozen my machine arm solid and brittle, and I twist my body to break myself free of my own arm. Now this hurts because there's a bond between me and the rook arm, but it's fight or flight. I've got to do something to escape because he's got me, otherwise I'm trapped. So I twist my body rapidly and will the arm to break, and it does. I break free from the machine, and the rook is on me, and he swings, but I move. I don't strike. This is an unarmed attack, so I move to move the machinery between me and the rook, and his arm collides with the machinery instead of me as I roll to safety, and his arm smashes to pieces on the machine. Again, I start to write that down and say what happens in the story beat by beat. But the importance of a critical attack, which is what I was able to land here, is that it reduces the remaining attacks from my opponent by 1. Now his attack score was only 3, which means he only had 1 more attack left, but now he doesn't have any left because of my critical attack back. So the fight is won. I've beaten him. How does this resolve? So as his arm smashes against the machine, his balance is lost. He's now lost something that he was using as a speed type particularly to balance his movement, and he tumbles to the floor, and as he does, a spike, a lever, a piece of the machine that I still don't understand pierces straight through the centre of his body, and he falls, part crushing the machine, fully crushing himself, and the life is gone from the rook. And there, in a steaming, gear wheel jamming mess, lies my defeated opponent. So that's the combat. And so now, in the aftermath of the combat, it's up to us to decide and work out what happened. I beat the rook, which means I get the reward. And we talked before about how the reward that I wrote down was another arm. Well, it's not another arm now, it's a replacement, because I lost my arm in that fight. So there would be, in my story, talk of hours of pulling and disconnecting and removing the most intact arm that this rook had, and beginning the ritual of bonding it to what I have on my back and replacing my arm with it. But I also took a wound in that battle as well, and that mustn't be forgotten. And if you come out of a battle with a wound, this means that you have to remove 1 point, 1 for every wound, from either your exploration or your combat scores. Now this is how your character gradually can get beaten by the world of the Colossal. But there are ways to get those points back as well. Again, require luck and a bit of skill and maybe some creative storytelling. But either way, I now must make the difficult choice of removing a point from my combat score or a point from my exploration score. And if I remove a point from my combat score, that will take me down to 3. And the biggest rooks have a combat score of 3, so I would only match them then. Or I could take one from my exploration score, which would take it from 3 down to 2. I'd see less on my adventures, but they'd move faster, and I could cope with that. So that's it. I would write now how I bond with my new arm, and I look at the side of my body where the ice crystals were and how they've scarred me, and what that means for my character. But I also noticed that the new arm I've got has this strange, almost like a hand shape at the end of it, quite unlike what I had before, just a brutal crowbar. And in the centre of it is a crystal that glows blue, because that rook had ice powers. And although the arm itself can't generate ice, there's something about it that is magical. I've gained something interesting, which maybe when I show someone in the future, they would question what happened. And I can tell the story of the time I took down a massive ice speed rook. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of how it all works. Feel free to ask any more questions in the comments. As I say, there's loads more to this than what you've seen here. There's more combat elements, there's more combat rules. There is a huge number of prompts in the exploration and combat phases that you haven't seen in this little gameplay today. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what the basic structure of the mechanic is, and it'll give you a sense of how I will be adding extra things onto this. And I can tell you now that the modules that we've unlocked with all the stretch goals, such as the oceans, the battlements and the cities, are only going to add more. Oceans is going to add a whole different way of navigating in the encounter and exploration phase. Battlements will also add that, new things that you might discover and see, as well as a new kind of rook that changes battle rules slightly. And cities will add a whole host of new rules that allow you to follow rumours and go out on quests and then come back to get rewards, that sort of thing. So I hope you're as excited as I am about this. I hope everything you've seen here today really amps you up for thinking about how your adventures can go down. And yeah, I'll see you in the next update. Thanks, guys.